I'm Elizabeth and I'm here to talk about books. In fact, I'm here to talk about my favorite books of 2018, as the rest of BookTube have already been doing for weeks. And I mean, why be original when everybody else are having so much fun? I want to join in. But before I talk about my favorite books, I want to talk quickly about some of my reading stats for this year, because I kind of wanted to make this 2 different videos, but I'm so slow in making this, and I kind of want to just wrap up 2018 now and be ready for the new year. So I'm going to mash them together, and this is probably going to be a video a bit longer than I usually make and that I am comfortable in making, but it will be what it will be, so we'll see how long it takes me to get through this. But I read 92 books in 2018, out of those 8 were rereads, and they will be disqualified from my best of the year list just simply because they have been on my best of the year lists before. I bought 110 books, which is obviously more than I read. Out of those 110, I have so far only read 39, and then I've read some off of my own shelves, and then I've read a lot of books borrowed, both from friends or from the library. So my TBR pile is growing. That was a goal of mine, to keep that kind of static. That didn't happen in 2018. Probably won't happen in 2019 either, let's face it. I read more at the end of the year than in the beginning. Most of that, I think, is because I reactivated my audiobook subscription in August, and audiobooks kind of just adds to my reading, because I listen to audiobooks at times where I would not be reading normally. So for instance on the bus, where I would get car sick from reading, or when doing the dishes or chores or working out or whatever. I'm not gonna brag about working out a lot this fall, because that just didn't happen. But anyway, audiobooks really boosted my read count at the end of the year. So I've read 13 books in hardback, 61 in paperback, 3 ebooks, and then 15 audiobooks, all coming from August until the end of the year. For this year I am including audiobooks from the beginning of the year, so that might even it out a bit. As for genres, I've been reading all over the place this year, as I do every year really. Read, I think, 34 non-fiction books. I've read 20 sci-fi fantasy books. I've read 10 comics, and then the rest is more general fiction. Most of the books I've read has been published after 2000. Most of them are between 200 and 500 pages. And most of them are from either North America or Europe. I have read books from 13 different countries, but most of them are European countries or US and Canada. That is something I want to improve for 2019. I want to be a bit more geographically diverse in my reading, if you can say it like that. This year I've read 32 books from the UK, 30 from the US, and then 11 from Norway and 6 from Canada, and the rest are just 1 here and 1 there. I read 77 books in English and only 14 in Norwegian this year, which is a very low count for Norwegian for me. I usually read way more in my own language than that. And then I've also read 1 book in Swedish, making it 3 languages read this year. As for gender of the authors, it's been fairly even this year. I've read 50 books by women and 40 by men, and then 2 that had several authors of both genders. As far as I know, none of the authors I've read this year has been non-binary. Yeah, I think that concludes what I want to share from my stats of this year. But I will say that this has been a very good reading year. As I said, I read 92 books. That's a bit fewer than last year. Don't really matter, because numbers, even though I like tracking them and looking at them in a spreadsheet, they're not what matters at the end. It's the enjoyment of the books. And for this year, I have read way more books that I've really enjoyed than I have in many years, and that is great. I have given an average rating to my books of 3.5. That is way higher than it's been in years. It's usually below 3, and that is something I'm very happy with. I have given 5 stars to 4 books, which for me is a high number in a year, because I reserve my 5-star ratings for the books that really stood out to me. But I've also given 4 stars to 40 books, and that is something I am very pleased with for 2018, and I hope that will continue into the next year. Let's talk about my favorite books of the year. As I said, I gave 5 stars to 4 books, and they are obviously my 4 favorite books of the year. And I'm gonna end with those, but before that I have a few others I just want to mention. So let's do the non-fiction ones first. One of them is At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell. This was a book about the existentialist movement in Paris. It's about the people, biographical information about the people connected to the movement, but also a lot of talk about their actual writings, and I found this to be super inspirational, and I want to check out both more about the people and read their actual writings. So that's a project I hope will get going in this year. I also read To the River by Olivia Lang, which was her first book. I really like this. It's a book where she takes a walk along the River Ouse and talks about both her journey and things, events and people connected to the river. And I really like this structure of non-fiction where you got this meandering way of thoughts weaving together, and I think she did it really well in this book. So that was a highlight for me. A couple of other highlights of in books I don't have with me is West with the Wind by Beryl Markham, which was an autobiography I read this summer. I had no expectations going into that book because I knew nothing about her. It was a random purchase in a second-hand bookshop, and I loved it. It was such a good biography or book in general. She had a very fascinating life, being raised in, I think it was Kenya. She was a horse race trainer, and she became a pilot in the pioneering days of piloting. And I mean, in addition to leading a fascinating life, she also was really good at writing, which was probably more surprising. So that was a very enjoyable read. Another non-fiction highlight was the biography of Paula Modersohn-Becker, written by Marie Darrieussecq. It was called Being Here. That was just a beautiful biography. It was so lovingly written somehow, and also beautifully written. I knew nothing about Modersohn-Becker either. I'm not really that into art, but I found it very fascinating reading about her, and the prose was gorgeous. So that's a book I would recommend if you're interested in a good biography. As for fiction, there's been many highlights there as well. One I've mentioned several times already is The Early King and the Kid in Yellow by Danny Denton, which is this sort of dystopian story from Ireland where it's all about the atmosphere and the rain and the language of the novel, and it was gorgeous and lush, and highly recommend it. I've read a Norwegian classic this year, which was The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vesaas. I read this in Norwegian. I haven't actually read this English edition yet, but I will very soon. This is also one of those atmospheric reads, although this is very wintry, where the others was probably more autumn really. But yeah, this I'm gonna talk about more in a later video, but I really enjoy this. It's all sort of mysterious and moody, and you can read many things into this, and it gives your brain room to think around the actual texts, and I really liked that in Vesos' writing, and I'm thinking I want to read more of Vesos. Another one I really like this year is Embassy Town by China Miéville. This is a sci-fi novel about a planet where humans have made a colony among the native aliens of the planet, and these aliens have a very peculiar language, and the problems with translations creates world-changing events in this novel. And as a linguist, that was something that was really fun to read about. China Miéville is a really clever writer, and constantly kept me guessing on what was going to happen, and really like this. And then at the very end of the year I read Outline by Rachel Cusk, which is one of those books I've seen everywhere, and normally hype like that don't draw me in, it scares me away, but for some reason I decided this was probably the kind of hype that would mean I would like the book, and I was right. This is the kind of novel where nothing much really happens. It's, I think, 10 chapters, and all chapters are built around one conversation the main character is having with a person she's met on that day, and I really got a lot out of reading these conversations, and I am definitely looking forward to reading the other two in this series. Probably will read both in the coming year. Then it is time for my top 4, and despite the fact that I've only been on BookTube since September, I have actually talked about 3 of these already. But coming in at number 4 is the one I never mentioned, and it's a Norwegian novel published in 2018. It's called Kinderhår, written by Maria Kjosfond. This is obviously not translated into English yet, but I'm predicting it very well might be in the future. The title needs no translation because it is an English word already, but if you, like me, are a bit fussy on what it means, it's a style of clothing made famous by Courtney Love, for instance, in the grunge movies in the 90s. And this book is horrific, but it's also really, really great. I like the way it's written. It's kind of, it starts out fairly muted, I would say, at least for Kjosfond. This is her second book, and she's got a certain style, and that style is very in-your-face, tough girl approach to things. It's very rough around the edges. There's not much prettiness in here, and that fits what it's about, because in here you meet Charlotte. I think she's 7 when we meet her. She lives with her mother, but her mother is very absent. Either she is sleeping a lot of the time, drug-induced sleep, or else she's out finding new dads for Charlotte. And one of these new dads sexually abuses her, and that starts a downward spiral for her, where she loses all kind of self-esteem, and she does a lot of self-harmful things, among them severe substance abuse. So this is not an easy read, but it's just so well written, so raw, and also funny at times. She, as in Kjosfond, really writes in punchlines at times. I don't normally like that, but in her books I have come to love it. And there is just enough hope in this book to make it not just bleak. I mean, it is horrific. It's not going to end in all bubbles and unicorns. That would not be realistic. But there is a glimmer of hope, and that's enough to make this bearable, really. At number 3 we find Ex Libris, Confessions of a Common Reader by Anne Fadiman. This is a non-fiction book. It's an essay collection all about the love of books and reading and words, and it feels like it's tailor-made for me, talking about going to second-hand bookshops, talking about merging book collection with your husband, talking about having a family obsessed with proofreading the menus of places they go to, or finding up not inventing, but finding difficult words. And I mean, it's all the love of the written word, and it was a love story I was all in for, and I loved every page of it. Then my second favorite of the year is a book I'm sure everybody knows. It's Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I talked about this in my postscript book tag. I have known for a long time that I would love reading Virginia Woolf, but for some reason I've been pushing it ahead of me. This was the year I finally picked up one of her novels, and I adored it. I mean, the writing is just the way I like it, and I don't know how to explain this. It was just great. I know I'm going to read more Virginia Woolf in the coming year. Probably I'm even going to reread this in the coming year. And then my favorite book of the year was another great surprise to me. It was a book I picked up randomly from recommendation shelves at the library. I hadn't really any idea of what it would be. It was by the Danish author Inger Christensen, which I have heard of but never read before. She's most known for her poetry, but she also wrote a lot of other things, including essays, and that collection in Norwegian was called Hemmelighetstilstanden. That was the version I read, but in English it's called The Condition of Secrecy, and it absolutely blew my mind. It's about writing, about creativity, about language, a couple of essays about other things, one about the particular linguists. They have all essays that have been published elsewhere before, but collected in this, and I just can't express how much I enjoyed the reading of it. It was one of the first books I read in 2018, and I knew kind of straight away that nothing would surpass it through the year. I don't own it, which is a travesty. I need to fix that ASAP. Really, I need to reread this book. I know it's a book I'm going to go back to time and time again. As I said, it's about writing and language and creativity, but it's not a how-to book. It's all about the philosophy, about the thoughts of the underlying urges that lives in your body. It's also political in many ways, but from a previous time. A lot of it connected to the Cold War, but also about consumerism and like the dangers she saw coming. But mainly it's just written in such a beautiful way. She is a poet, her language is beautiful, and all of these meandering thoughts and musings about writing and reading and creativity just really clicked with something in my brain, and it was by far my favorite book of 2018. So here's to hoping that 2019 will bring me some more of these great reading experiences. If you have any recommendations for me that you think I will love, please feel free to put them in the comments, and until next time, bye bye.